Baby, baby.
Good evening, listeners. It is October 8th, 2020. It is your boy, NotoriousSA, aka Steve Anderson, aka Future Election Judge. Quick public service announcement. Not sponsored, just want to let people know. With the election day coming up, we need polling place workers and election judges because they are very crucial elements of the voting process. Now, if you haven't voted by mail, I generally recommend voting by mail. It allows me to get a ballot and to look up every race, look up endorsements, candidate positions, see which judicial candidates should be retained and which ones shouldn't. Fill it out on my own time, make sure everything's marked correctly, and then mail it back. But if you don't want to do that, or you don't feel safe, or you think that your state's mail-in procedures are too complicated, there is the option to go in and vote. Now, this is done because people are willing to go work on election day in terms of setting up equipment, checking voters to making sure they're registered, in some cases registering voters, making sure all the results are done fairly and accurately, and then making sure those reports are turned in timely. I would say I took a 4-hour training class today. We covered everything from how to check if someone's registered to what happens if they have a mail-in ballot that they're turning in or it's a provisional ballot. There's a lot that goes into the election process. And frankly, if you can be a poll watcher. Most parties will give you credentials for that. You can be an election judge. Again, parties are always looking for those. And of course, you could be a precinct polling technician, like I'm doing, because it pays more. Oh, and you can get paid. I should have mentioned that. A lot of places will pay. It may not be a lot, but it's usually for one day's work, and it can be a couple $100. And more importantly, you get to fill the civic duty of being able to know that you helped contribute to democracy. I was a poll watcher in the March primary at the very beginnings of the coronavirus outbreak. I must say it was a different time. But the idea that people need to go in to work these polls is very critical, especially now. And for a lot of these poll workers, a lot of the time they're elderly retirees and their health may be in jeopardy. So if you're a younger person, or if you've already, if you've contracted COVID and gotten through it and are now immune, I would recommend doing this so that our senior citizens don't feel the need to and put themselves at risk, because they will be dealing with, in some cases, thousands of people coming through the doors, right? And every polling place is different. You may have a quieter day, some may have longer days, but we shouldn't have the immune compromised be the ones that have to step up and help with our democracy. If you have a job, I get it. You can always try to ask for the day off and maybe get paid for it. Depending on where you live, some states actually allow you to take time off to go vote. So take advantage of that if you have it. Just make sure to vote. And I'm actually thrilled because in the lead up to every election, we always see celebrities and influencers and people talk about voting. And, you get your vote or die or choose or lose campaigns and whatnot. But this is definitely different, right? The amount of information available about voting, the amount of websites that will tell you about voting, and the amount of people that are begging you to vote, it tells me it's going to be a very high turnout type of year. So we need people to be in the ground, in the field, in the polling places to count these votes, to make sure they're processed fairly, and to make sure that we continue to reaffirm the faith in our democratic institutions. So again, if you have the time, if you want to feel a sense of civic pride, and honestly, if you want to get paid, check out your local county clerk's office or whoever in your area designates the polling places, the election judges. Apply, pick your party, see what you can do. It's good for you, it's good for America, and it's great for democracy. Some quick news updates for you here. Last night was the vice presidential debate between Senator Kamala Harris and Vice President Mike Pence. We learned nothing from this debate other than the fact that a fly was able to stay on the vice president's head for about 2 minutes before he noticed and the fly left. So that's the biggest thing that happened, right? The fly, and let's be respectful to Mr. Pence, the only reason the fly landed on him is because he's dead inside, and the fly was able to sense that. 4 years of selling his conservative credentials and credibility, you could tell when he was up on the debate stage that he was trying his best to work with what he's done, but there isn't a whole lot to go off of. Senator Harris did as Senator Harris does. I thought she was personable. She obviously went to great lengths to try to avoid any kind of negative associations with any of her answers. And, honestly, I think she seems like a nice person. So, not a whole lot to learn from the scenario here, except that the vice president is, in fact, the next person in line to the presidency. So the important aspects here are that both of the candidates for president are in their 70s, one of whom is currently infected with coronavirus. So the idea that one of these two may have to step up in the event that health complications prevent the president from doing their job means that we should take it seriously. In terms of Joe Biden, it doesn't appear that he may want to run beyond a first term or one term. So likely Kamala Harris will be the standard bearer of the Democratic Party in the 2024 election, pending who knows what. And again, if you're going to try to predict what happened 4 years from now, good luck with that, right? The predictions business is definitely getting hammered because nobody knows what's going on half the time. But make no mistake, the VP debate is important. And in the longer term, we recall that the vice presidential debates between, Joe Biden before he was vice president and again when he was vice president, it may matter because eventually the vice president, even if they leave the office, may come back at some point. And you'll have to remember what they did and what they said, right? And again, I should stress that this person is supposed to take the reins if the president is no longer able to. Most of the time, the VP selection is just to try to balance out characteristics that the main presidential candidate doesn't have. In Trump's case, Mike Pence was his call to the evangelical Christians and the traditional conservative Republicans. For Joe Biden, Kamala Harris is a woman of color, which he pledged to pick before any other kind of notifications about the vice president were there. She's younger than him. She's hip, I guess you would say, and she's hopefully going to be a person who will be able to step in the event that the vice president, and then my projection is President Biden, won't be able to. Editor's note: cough at 3:50. Check for that. So not a whole lot going on with that. In more concerning news, the governor of Wisconsin, Governor Whitmer, has been trending today because apparently the FBI has thwarted a plot to kidnap her from six men who were alleged in a plot as members of a Michigan militia to violently overthrow the government. And this is more, not more important, but in my mind, this is something that matters, because something I've noticed a lot, which is a tension that Trump folks are going to have to face, is that many Trump folks are pro-police, but they're also pro-Second Amendment, and they also tend to sometimes be supportive of these quote-unquote militias who are there to assert their Second Amendment rights and, I don't know, I guess called up in the event of a foreign invasion. Like the concept of a militia, right, has gone from being something essential to national defense, as in our very, very, very early days, to something that seems to be more of a hobby than it is an actual call to arms. But the problem is that some people take it too far. Some people think that being a member of a militia means that I'm the actual authority and that I am the last stop between the civilized world and a tyrannical government. And I get it, in the back of every Second Amendment backers' minds is that that's what this is for, is that the right to arm myself is in the event that the government becomes tyrannical and I need to defend myself or take up arms against it, that's the case. Right, and this definitely sounds, again, in a 1776 atmosphere, that's one thing. But in a 2020 atmosphere, when we have numerous law enforcement agencies and the National Guard, to me, the idea of a militia seems a little bit unnecessary. Doesn't mean you can't stop people from joining them, right? And if they want to dress up in camo and go target shooting and just get drunk with their buddies later, then that's one thing, right? But these dudes believed that the governor of Michigan was a threat to their life and liberty because they had to deal with what would be at best maybe haphazard requirements for the virus. Let's be clear. These dudes all showed up. They have a lot of guns, and they were under the assumption that they had to, quote unquote, kidnap the governor to defend their rights. Let me just say that this is all alleged. Everyone has their day in court, as these people will. So let's not make any assumptions about what happens. I'm just reporting the news as I see it. This I'm reading off of WXYZ.com, ABC News for Michigan, wherever that may be. So just a quick reminder here, folks, that if you're part of a militia group and you hear a lot of crazy talk from them about, armed resistance and a tyrannical government, and not in a hypothetical academic context, but in a this is real and we're really going to do something about it context, right? The quote-unquote Wolverine Watchman, you should leave. You should not be part of this militia because they're crazy, and crazy people with weapons is a very dangerous combination. So again, my best to the governor of Michigan. Nobody deserves to have that kind of situation happen to them, right? And these dudes will have their day in court. Other than that, the president seems to be upset that they're not doing debates anymore. They're all going to be virtual. He's pulled money from numerous states in the Rust Belt to run ads in the Sun Belt. Joe Biden is currently out campaigning in public in a socially distant manner. And all of the internal polling the Republicans are getting continue to signal that something catastrophic is happening. And they are going to get wrecked in November. Maybe not even it looks like Trump is winning on election night and then eventually the polls turn against him. Like, the polls may be against him from the start and just get worse over the entire night. Again, We're still some 26 days away, so a lot can happen. But if things continue to hold, this is my message to Trump supporters, right? Maybe some of you were there when Mitt Romney lost in 2012 and you were just convinced that there's no way this could happen. Convince yourselves that Joe Biden is likely to be the next president. That doesn't mean you have to agree with it. And you can tell me the polls don't matter. And 2016 showed all of this stuff and blah, 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 blah. Look, man, I've heard it. I've heard it a lot. And since then, every other form of number has been accurate in terms of its polling, right? And we're not in 2016 anymore, right? Trump no longer gets hours of just free, unmediated coverage. Social networks are far more strict with what information is being put out there. The national security apparatus is well aware of foreign intervention, and the tech companies are basically taking every PR move imaginable to make sure that they don't become centers of misinformation, right? The circumstances are very different, right? And yes, presidents in office tend to win re-election, but no president has been like Trump because he's never been popular. He's only been above water once, which ended in February of 2017. He's been underwater ever since. They've lost the House. They've lost numerous districts. He got the worst scenario opponent for him as a Democratic opponent, and there seems to be no plan to actually win this election. In my personal opinion, I think Trump wants to lose. I honestly do, right? And that's because, yeah, he likes the trappings of power. He likes the adoration of fans, right? And if we didn't live in a coronavirus world and he was able to travel the country and host these big rallies, then maybe we would feel different about it. But no. Since social distancing has kicked in, he's had isolated moments. And when he's had crowd moments, it becomes a super spreader event. Nothing about this year is good for Trump. He's probably just going to stick it out till the end. He's going to say, I never had a chance. He'll always play the victim. And when he leaves, he'll be the president who never was able to fully get his agenda accomplished because the left came after him from day one and never let up. And honestly, that wouldn't necessarily be totally wrong. The left never let up on him. Ever. Sometimes it was a bit irrational, but a lot of times it was legitimate disagreements. And honestly, if Trump leaves the office, he can just do whatever he wants. He doesn't have to be subject to the rules. He doesn't have to have all these people questioning him all the time. He can go off into the distance, no longer be elected, no longer be a burden on the Republicans' necks. He can go start Trump TV, charge you $10 a month, try to make some money on this, and maybe pay off some of those debts he very much owes, and then just be, that old president that we had. And years from now, we'll talk about the Trump years and just be like, man, that was crazy. Like, what a crazy set of events that we elected Donald Trump as president, which, when the history books look back, we'll have the ability of context to look at all the times that celebrities and all of us participated in Trump's show and his shenanigans and encouraged it. And then we'll see what happens when we elect somebody who is obviously not prepared for this job. I don't see anything changing. And if you're a Trump supporter, I'm sorry, but I'm not here to sugarcoat the numbers for you. If you're a Biden supporter, I can tell, or if you're just anti-Trump, I can tell that you're nervous and you still have the 2016 shakes about you. But the numbers are much better for this. And you know what? Joe Biden is not Hillary Clinton, right? Which might be asset number one. And he's not Donald Trump, which is asset number two. And even if the majority of his voters want him because he's not Trump, that still means that there's more voters who don't want Trump in office than those that do. That's the law of numbers. And that's how you win elections. Who knows what's going to happen next, but, kudos to the person who was able to first get the Twitter handle for the fly on Vice President Mike Pence. got more followers than me or this podcast, so that's what quick thinking gets you in the social media age. So the main topic I want to get to tonight is something that's been near and dear to me, something that I've been workshopping for probably at least a month or two now. And again, the idea behind these podcasts isn't so much that it's just going to be what's topical for today, because, later on down the road, sometimes what's topical today will be completely irrelevant 3 weeks from now. So it's nice to have something that has a much larger theme to it, so that if you come back to it or somebody's hearing this for the first time, days, months, weeks, years later on, is that there's some part of the story that I'm telling that resonates with you besides my jokes, of which I don't have a lot, or beyond the main news cycle of the day, something that has a much deeper hole in the base of your brain that you can look back to. America is divided. Now, the polls will tell you that if you look at the actual issues and you look at, where people stand, there's often more common ground than people realize. But people feel divided. People do not feel connected anymore. This isn't a new phenomenon. If you've ever heard of Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam, the concept of America kind of atomizing as our social networks get smaller and smaller. Ironically, while our social networks, technology-wise, get more evasive over time, it seems like our actual human connection is kind of dissolving. And in the age of coronavirus, even more so, because we're kind of just stuck in our own immediate area, right? So we don't really have to interact with people, and we can all just kind of sit inside our own comfortable echo chamber, right? And hear the same things we want to hear all the time. Honestly, I'm not a fan of that approach, because you have to step out, right? Sometimes you have to go outside and get a breath of fresh air. Sometimes you go to a new restaurant because you want to try something different and you hear good things about it. Sometimes you watch a new show that was recommended to you that somebody says you should, and you dive right in, right? It's always good to have a kind of new, refreshing moment in life. And it seems like we don't have those anymore, because we don't really want to try to go outside of what we feel familiar with. And if there is something different, it's almost always assumed to be bad. It's always assumed to be, there's no way you can understand where anybody's coming from, right? There's nothing that's connecting us together. And I'm always trying to find a way to connect us beyond our immediate partisan sensibilities, or things like race, or gender, or ethnicity, or your locality, right? Being an American means you are part of something larger than yourself, right? What many people believe about America is that we are a nation of ideas, right? It's not as if our blood or our soil determines that we're Americans. It's if you believe in the American idea, right? And I think a lot of people, honestly, I feel like a lot of people felt that way during the Obama years, and I feel like a lot less people feel that way now. And part of it may just be that when your party's not in power, you may feel like the country that you knew no longer exists. You're right. How could people vote so different from me? How could they think so radically different? How can we even be in the same planet or playing field? Right? There's nothing connecting us. And the reason for this, I think, goes to what many of us are learning about how America integrates and how America changes and grows over time. Throwback time. When you were in school, and you were learning about the history of America, what's the phrase that you associate with immigrants coming here and assimilating into American culture? You've probably heard of this idea that America is a melting pot. What you probably didn't know is that The Melting Pot is also a play by Israel Zangwill, first staged in the year 1908. It depicts the life of a Russian Jewish immigrant family. And I'm not even going to try to pronounce the last name. But basically, it's about a family that has survived a pogrom which killed the mother and sister of this immigrant, and he wishes to forget about the horrible events. He composes an American symphony and wants to look forward to a society free of ethnic divisions and hatred, rather than backward at his traumatic past. Although the idea of melting as a metaphor for ethnic assimilation had been used before, Zangwill's play popularized the term melting pot as a symbol for this occurrence in American society. So you've heard it before. Some people still call it this. They call America a melting pot. The idea of it is a monocultural metaphor for a heterogeneous society that is becoming more homogeneous, the different elements melting together with a common culture or vice versa. For a homogeneous society, becoming more heterogeneous. You know what? 147. I'm going to cut that out. I'm going to come back to it. So the idea of the melting pot, which has been our primary method of kind of explaining assimilation to the United States, has been that people have come to America from another place that maybe they're fleeing persecution, they're fleeing poverty, they're fleeing violence, and they come here, and no matter where they came from, whether it's Ireland, England, South Africa, Australia, Mexico, Portugal, Spain, whatever country you want, right? You can come to America and you can melt into our society. Now, this is still a pretty predominant idea of thinking in America, but unfortunately, the melting pot theory has a little bit of a problem, in my mind, at least. Not that it's not a bad idea to aspire to, but it can result in a kind of washing out of the individuality that exists in America, right? And if you look to our history, right, while we have said that America is in fact a melting pot, there's been lots of people who believe that some people shouldn't even get the chance to enter the melting pot. You know, the nativists, people who want to severely restrict access to the melting pot. And the nativist is a term used from the earlier days, right? And by earlier, I mean earlier 19th century, about when people started to clamp down on immigration and using immigration quotas. So while the melting pot idea has always been, in theory, one that is about us coming together to form something new and blend together, if you weren't part of the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant class, the idea of being melted into society was either something you were restricted from doing, or it was you would have to adapt to this particular lifestyle in order to be considered assimilated into America. So over time, this particular line of thinking has sort of gotten less popular, in the sense that people don't feel it actually reflects the diversity in America. Now, something that I learned in school that in my informal surveys with people, not everyone else has, right? There's a different kind of metaphor being used in terms of what we call multiculturalism, and that is the idea of America as a salad. Right? You may have heard the salad theory of America, right? You know, and I don't want to have to define salad, but like when we define melting pot, right? I know what you're thinking, right? It's a pot, everything melts in it. But don't think of it as like, you know, a place where everything is equally melted in. Maybe think of it more like a giant, I don't know what they're called, receptacle that's full of like melted metal, right? That all melts together, right? And no matter what I throw in there, right, it's not really going to be a mixture of metal and whatever else I throw in. It's probably just going to be metal, right? So I think the idea behind the salad theory is that the melting pot either just excludes people from being part of it, or it dissolves them so that there were no longer any kind of recognizable individual characteristics. The salad bowl, the multicultural bowl, is exactly what it sounds like. It's that America's a salad, right? While there are individual ingredients, but they're served together, right? But they're not really together, right? Like in the melting pot idea, no matter what I throw in there, it all just melts into the same kind of bland, whatever the predominant trait is, right? With a salad, right, you have your lettuce, you have your tomatoes, you have those horrible things called croutons that for some reason people want. You may have other vegetables, you may have a different kind of salad, right? But generally the idea of the salad as we think of it is just a bunch of stuff that's thrown together, right, and covered in a dressing. But it's not really itself kind of a united meal in that you can just kind of pick apart the parts of the salad you don't want, and it doesn't really change the context of the salad, right? If I like lettuce and I don't like tomatoes, I can take the tomatoes out of the salad and not eat them. And I believe that the idea behind this is that we are trying to move past the idea that America is a particular ethnic, racial, or predominant religious group, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, and that we obviously have people from very different cultures of all ethnicities and all races kind of coming together, right? And the idea behind the salad is that while we are all technically one meal, right, our individual parts are still in touch, and you keep your cultural identity, right? So while this idea has garnered some credibility over time, it has its skeptics, right? A more conservative look would say that this kind of idea means that we're not really united by anything. It's that if we're a salad, right, we're all separate, really. There's nothing that really binds us together in any kind of serious fashion, right? And everything we have is just literally and metaphorically dressing, right? Just the idea of being American is covered on top of what you are culturally. So if you're an immigrant from Ghana, if you're a migrant worker from Mexico, if you're the second generation of Germans who immigrated here, whatever it is, right? Like, you are an American in the technical sense, but really your background is more of a defining feature of you, right? And you can be put together with other people and ingredients, but at the end of the day, right, you're mostly going to be separate. So I'm not a general fan of this idea either, because one, I don't like salad, and two, the idea that if we're a salad, then we're not really in it together, right? Because a salad, no matter how much you kind of toss and mix it up, it's still easily picked apart. I think that kind of divide where we don't have anything that's uniting us, but we're not all one homogeneous blob, has kind of put us in this position where, what if there is nothing, what if there is no answer, right? What if it's either we're all just one giant blob of nothingness, or what if we're all just separate pieces together, just kind of voluntarily by choice being part of the same meal. So I've been thinking to myself, there's got to be a better way, right? Infomercial Steve came out and said, are you tired of being either forced to become part of a homogenous conglomerate that removes your individuality, but you also want to be part of something larger than yourself that can't be picked apart based on simple characteristics? Right? What allows us to be individuals, but also ingrained into a larger society so that we don't feel so alone and that we don't feel we don't feel isolated, and we feel connected in a much broader sense. And I've been thinking to myself, there needs to be something, because if people believe that either A, you come to America and you lose every characteristic you've ever had, or B, in America, your characteristics are your primary feature and being American is just sort of the dressing on top of it, right? There's no real way to kind of combine those in a way that everybody's happy with. One side's going to say that you're not assimilated enough. The other says that I shouldn't have to assimilate in any way, shape, or form. Or if I do, I should be able to keep my own cultural context in America, where that culture may not necessarily be the predominant culture, or maybe even jive with what most of mainstream America wants. And I keep thinking to myself, there's gotta be something, right? There's gotta be some form of common ground that I'm missing here, because we have to have something, right? We have to have something that we all kind of have in common and we're forged together with. And I guess I was thinking, since in the context of, an analogy of food, either one of them is a pot where everything melts together, right? Or one is a salad where everything is separate. I guess I would lean more towards the melting pot idea. But again, right, from our past, right, the people who have called America a melting pot have also actively prevented people from being part of America, right? So there's got to be something. I keep thinking to myself, is there a middle ground here? Is there something that either has separate ingredients but all kind of blend together, right? And then it hit me, right? In the middle of a medical cannabis-induced haze, I kept thinking to myself, there's gotta be something, right? And also, I'm super hungry. I could really go for some soup. Yeah, I could really go for some chicken noodle soup. Maybe throw some hot sauce in there. Maybe a little salt and pepper. Maybe throw some of that extra chicken I have laying around. And then it hit me. Soup. Soup. The thing in cans in your pantry. The thing that most people pick instead of salad when they go to Olive Garden, hopefully. The ramen you used to eat all the time in college, or the ramen you still eat now because it's delicious. The homemade chicken soup when you were sick. Or in my case, the Tom Yum Goong from the local Thai restaurant because I was sick. And that's where I had this realization that America is a soup. And you're probably saying to yourself, Steve, isn't that's just the melting pot idea, but you're calling it soup. And no, I'm going to say it's different because, again, with a melting pot, it's not really a soup as it is everything is blending together, right? Whatever you get melts into the same blob. And based on our history, people have excluded you or basically said your individual characteristics are no longer relevant. And that's kind of a system we're trying to avoid. But in this multicultural society where my other predominant characteristics are forever going to be on top of me being an American, I can't really connect with other people, because if I'm forever part of a different group and different groups never get along, then how am I supposed to be connected to something larger than myself? And this is where soup comes in. Because ask yourself, what is soup? It's a question I didn't know I would ever have to go into a deep dive in, but what is a soup? Right? What constitutes a soup? Right? Is cereal a soup? I don't think so, but that's a debate for another day. When I looked up what the basic ingredients are for a soup, right? Soup is basically, several components. It can be hot or cold, but most of the time there's a liquid involved, preferably hot. That liquid could be water, or it could be stock. Put some bones in there, boil some water. get yourself a nice soup going. There could be meat, could be vegetables, could be some other protein. Right? You know what I'm talking about, right? If I were to say soup to you and you imagine soup, you might think of a different soup than I am, but you're probably thinking of something in a bowl with a spoon, probably hot. And when I started to look more into what a soup is, right, the more it all started to make sense, because if you think about it, right, of the things that Americans have in common, one is the legal structure that we live under, which is the U.S. Constitution. The other is the operating principles behind that Constitution, which is the Declaration of Independence. You know, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, all that jazz. Right? The principles that we live by are in the Declaration, and the operating procedure that we use to make those principles work is the Constitution. And this is the great civic asset that we all have as Americans, is that even if I'm Muslim, Jewish, Christian, flying spaghetti monster, Scientology, whatever religion you are protected under our laws. The First Amendment allows you to be free and religious, and America is far more religious than other developed countries in the world. Right? Our laws are technically secular, right? And I'm one who believes that laws should be secular, right? But they're secular in a way that doesn't favor any particular church, and it doesn't disfavor any particular church, right? The federal government doesn't have a official church that you need to be part of, right? But it recognizes that a Catholic church, a Protestant church, an evangelical church, a Jewish synagogue, a Muslim mosque, all of these places have unique characteristics that make them different, and the right to believe in those and to practice those without interference from the government is a core feature of protecting who we are and our cultural identity. Often religion has been a very, very hot flashpoint in this country, from Catholics to Jews to Quakers to Islam. Right? There's always been a group of people who believe that their particular religious belief is the way to be, and that not only should we try to convert those who either don't believe or have different faiths, we need to have the state enforce these rules on our behalf, because we are so correct in our views that we must use the force of law to enforce it. That is a dangerous line of thinking that has resulted in the deaths of millions of people. If you come from a particular country, and again, America has not always been good on this. You're Italian, Polish, Greek, German, Japanese, Chinese, Mexican, Guatemalan, right? There's always been a group of people who said that the next group of people aren't really Americans. They don't really fit in. They don't really understand our customs. They don't ever assimilate. They don't ever adopt, right? Unfortunately, for a lot of them, it all correlates with skin color. In America, your ethnic background and your race, again, the government isn't designed to help you because of it. It is not designed to hurt you because of it. You should be treated equally, right? We haven't lived up to that promise, obviously, right? But the promise itself is not the problem. It's our execution of it, right? And over time, right, you can see that a lot of ethnic divisions will sometimes just fade into the background as multiple generations of intermarriage kick in. When I look at my own DNA test results and I see that I'm obviously 99.1% European, right? That all puts me in the same area, but based on those results, you know, some of the family is from England, some is from Sweden, some is from Germany, some is from Norway, some is from Poland. And not too long ago, being from these places meant that you were predominantly that, and you weren't American if you weren't in the class that was in charge when other people were trying to emigrate in. And now it's all kind of blended together. Right? You can still have Italian pride, or Irish pride, but odds are your nationality is not predominantly that anymore. Right? I think a lot of these DNA tests are kind of showing us that there is a multi-layer process that goes into making who we are. Thousands of people who we've never met from far different aspects travel, meet, fall in love, babies are made, babies grow up, same process repeats itself. And over the long haul, ideally what you'll see is that groups that were separate sort of kind of merge together, and the traditions that we have all just kind of form into, one particular unifying theme. Right? Not everybody is Irish, and some of us are only Irish in the small sense, but everybody can celebrate St. Patrick's Day. Right? No matter what your race is, that you can celebrate St. Patrick's Day, and it shouldn't be culturally offensive, particularly if it's just drinking. The idea about America being a soup is that the bones that make the stock are the Declaration of Independence principles, right? The idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and people to live their life free of interference from the state without representation, right? That is the very foundation of what makes America. And the stock is the Constitution that allows these principles to go into action, right? It creates a system of government that at its best is imperfect, but is always on the verge of being more perfect, right? That yes, eventually people became part of what we call we the people. It used to be white male landowners, and then it involved people who weren't landowners. It eventually involved people who were immigrants, women, black people, all races, all religions, right? The idea is that over time, there's immigration, there's conflict, there's generational change, right? And that in the long run, while there will be clashes on cultures, the system that we have in place allows these cultures not only to exist and tolerate each other, but allows people within them to intermingle, right? To have a more common understanding of something. And in the long run, these changes will combine, right? They will merge together to create something that has the characteristics of its original self, but is also something new. Something uniquely different than what it was before. You can still see it. You can still see that it's there and trace its roots, but once it's in our system, once it becomes part of American culture, it becomes its own thing. Because America has a uniqueness about it, that when we add something new, it not only just stays what it is, but it becomes part of the American landscape. Ideas that are once considered forbidden and not talked about become hot points of discussion, and then become mainstream opinion, and then just become the way it is. Right? A system that allows that to happen, right? That allows different ideas and concepts and flavors to ebb and flow over time, allows this very soup that we live in to become something much bigger than ourselves. And if you're still with me here, and if you are, great. If not, sorry, this is too boring for you. All right, Steve, I'll buy your soup concept, right? So the melting pot says that if we throw it all together, it all melts together, and it's not really showing individuals. If it's a salad, they're all separate. There's not a whole lot of it together, but they all have their pieces. Your soup concept intrigues me, but what do you mean how does that work? Because what if there's like too much of one ingredient in a soup? It ruins it, right? And sure, if we're taking it in a literal sense, yes, right? If it's one particular type of soup and you're trying to cram a lot of ingredients into it, it's probably not going to be a good soup, right? But if you think about the concept of what a soup is and how it can change and vary, right? Google how many different types of soup there are, right? You'll get subsections of soup, and you'll get mixes of soup, and you'll get crossovers of other types of soup, right? But the general concept that it's still a soup means that despite its numerous variations, right, we all still will call it soup. And there's a lot of soup out there. I'm going to try to list them here, and you can tell me what your favorite is. Feel free to let me know. All about soup. But you can have a soup that's a chicken noodle soup, a tom yum goong soup, a lobster bisque, clam chowder, right? And we're all going to have the same relative concept of what it is, right? And you can change ingredients and mix them out and create fusions of it, and it's still soup, but it's something different than it was before. And when we throw ingredients in soup, when we have our bones and our stock, and we throw in our meat, you throw in your vegetables, you throw in your spices and seasonings, right? Everything in the soup is going to have a little bit of flavor mixed in with it, but it's also going to contribute to the soup's overall flavor, right? We are all cooked in the broth, that is the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, and those things affect what we can do. But who we are as individuals and what our unique flavors are mix in with the broth and with the other ingredients. And I kept thinking to myself, you're going to say ingredients are people, and that's not the direction you want to go in unless you're talking about Soylent Green. And unfortunately, to go back and forth in this analogy, I have to use it. But let's not think about eating people if that's where you're going with this, right? Let's think about it as America is this giant pot that has boiling water and stock and bones, right? And sure, you can throw some chicken in. You just got some chicken and broth. Cool, right? You could technically eat that, but what fun would that be? Maybe throw a vegetable in there. Maybe throw some carrots. But chicken and carrots, you gotta have something else. You gotta throw some noodles in there as well. You can't have just chicken and carrots. You gotta have noodles. And what if you want something that's not just broth, right? What if you want some sort of seasoning, some salt and some pepper, right? Maybe a little paprika. In my case, you want to throw some buffalo sauce in there, maybe some chili powder, really spice it up for you. Think about how complex this is already, right? When we've already added all these different ingredients to soup, and on their own, they're their own ingredients, right? And you can all taste them in their own ways. And as you continue to mix and match all of them, they all contribute to the flavor of the soup. And the soup is becoming something new every time you add something different. And here's the best part about soup, is that you can take a lot of different ingredients, right? Some older stuff and some fresh stuff and mix it together. And all of a sudden, it all becomes something new. Isn't the idea of America that no matter where you've come from or where you've been, you can become something new? That you're not followed by the sins of your father's past or your fatherland or motherland, right? That when you come to America, right, as long as you follow the rules of our Constitution and want to live by the Declaration of Independence, right, that you too can become successful, even if you don't speak English, which most people will end up doing, but you don't necessarily have to. That your culture will be accepted, that you can open up a restaurant, open up a bar, open up a business, start driving a cab, start driving Uber, work in a Jimmy John's, work at a McDonald's, you can do yard work, you can set up a lemonade stand. You could do these things and be part of society. And in an ideal world, right, you're not going to have your race or your religion or your background or your language be a source of interference from the state. You can be here and you can be whatever you want to be, but you will be an American. If you're an Indian American, you're still an American. If you're a Chinese American, or you're a Jewish American, or an Israeli American, or a German American, you're still an American. You still are part of what makes you who you are, but you're also part of something larger, right? For while I am the product of all the generations around me, I am here in America, and by virtue of that, I am an American. from the Declaration of Independence. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. These truths, these self-evident truths, that all men are created equal, with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The statement of this means that there are things that exist beyond government and beyond the state, that you as a person who exist have an unalienable right to your life, to your liberty, and to pursue happiness. These are things that exist outside of the state, outside of the government, and outside of any force that tells you that you are only a person because we say so. No, you are a person because you are a person, right? You are a person because you exist. And because you exist, there are things that the government cannot take away from you, that the state cannot take away from you, that nobody can take away from you. What we have to understand is that when we talk about these three things, the right to live, the right to be free, and the right to pursue happiness, these are the very basic stages of life. Everybody wants to be physically safe and not be in danger all the time. And once they're not in danger, they'll want to be able to do things without restrictions, without unreasonable restrictions, without restrictions that at least I have some say or consent in. Things that can't be done to me. Things that just can't come after me and destroy me because I want to exist. And the pursuit of happiness is the chance to be happy. If I'm physically safe and I'm free, but if I'm not allowed to pursue what I want, then I can't really be happy. And if I can't really be happy, then I can't really be who I want to be. I'm not able to be who I want to be if I don't have these three things. And these three things are something that, as Americans, unites us beyond anything that we've ever done in terms of where we've come from, who we are, and how we define ourselves. Do you ever think about the Declaration in those terms? I know that many of you have read it, or you've heard it, or you've heard the phrases for it, but do you ever really think about what it means? That, while we take it for granted now, in its time, is a revolutionary concept that man has rights that exist outside of the state's authority. That for once, it is not where you come from or where you live that makes you who you are. Who you are makes you who you are. And where you live and where you come from does not mean that you are to be that you are forever cast in that way, and that you are forever subject to that line of ruling, that line of questioning. You get to be you. And you get to be you in a way that not only connects you to others, but also allows you to keep some of your own individuality. When you think about our Constitution, when you think about what it does in terms of protecting us and placing restrictions on government that allow us to be free, ask yourself, when you hear this statement, what does it mean to you? We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution, the United States of America. In many places in the world now, they have now embraced the concept of individual rights, and not every place has. But the fact that this American principle has now spread across the world, and our Constitution is now the basis for democracies across the world, it should tell you that when these guys took a chance on this idea, that they really hoped that this would spread beyond the small borders that we had as the 13 colonies. That this idea would not just trigger Americans, but trigger men and women everywhere across the world. That they are individuals and that they have rights, and those rights exist outside of the state telling me that they exist. That I have them, right? That if someone's going to come after me, they have to prove that I am the danger, that I am a threat to society. And not just a threat instead they said that, as in a real threat. And that if my life and my liberty are at stake, that I have every right to defend those things, because those rights exist outside of what the government told me I can do. And because of these principles, America has, over time, seen people come in, and it grows, and it changes. And this very Constitution has amendments to it, because even after they were done writing the Constitution, they were aware that there still was work. The Bill of Rights, that helps us protect our freedom of speech, our freedom to assemble and petition our government, that allows us to carry arms for protection, that prevents soldiers from being quartered in our house in wartime without our consent, that provides the government needs justification for searches, and they can't punish me cruel and unusually. That I have a right to, if I am accused of something, I have a right to a jury of my peers. And if it's not listed out here, then the states have the rights to do it. So the state that you live in may go above and beyond what the U.S. government has promised you, right? It can't go below that, but it can go above that in providing for rights. The federal Constitution is the baseline for what protections you have as a citizen. And while we've often lived in a world where those things have not been equally applied, where one race has been in charge and another one has been subject to cruelty, while slavery was part of our initial Constitution, while we punished Native Americans for being here first, while we've treated other religious groups and other ethnic groups with disdain, the idea is that people were able to fight on behalf of those marginalized groups. That the system allowed them to express their emotions and their ideas and to connect with their fellow citizens. And there are things in life that transcend our religion and our race and our ethnic backgrounds. Resistance to violence, resistance to those who would wish to hurt us, the idea of a free, prosperous people to go where they want, to do what they want, as long as they're not infringing upon others. And what does that mean? These are all debates that we have to have, because that is the constant struggle of America, is that we are always pushing the boundaries of what is acceptable and what am I to believe in, and what can I let other people believe in, and what if the authorities don't like it, but I have a system in place that in theory, that in the very essence of what it is, says that I am an individual and that I have a right to be alive, I have a right to be free, and I have a right to be happy. Without the state telling me that I have these things. While I may be one ingredient in a soup, I am one of many other ingredients that all exist. We are all in the Constitution. We are all part of that, right? Stock that we're in, that came from those bones that is the Declaration of Independence. No matter how many ingredients or flavors you add in, we are all still part of the same soup. And people may not like that there's new ingredients coming in. They may think that there should be more of their own ingredients. But they don't get a say in that. They don't get to determine how big the soup is and how many ingredients it gets. Things are going to happen. Some ingredients clash. Some end up working together. Sometimes they just stay separate. Some ideas that may be allowed to be part of it, they can be drowned out. They can be washed out. Both good and bad. Ideally, the good comes to the top and the bad sinks away. And the idea of what a soup is can vary from person to person, but it's still a soup. The Islamic American who wants to live their way of life and the Christian American who wants to live their way of life can be part of the same soup. And they may be different ingredients, they may taste somewhat different, but they are still boiled together in our Constitution. They are still part of the same idea that that Christian and that Muslim both have a right to live their life free from oppression of the state. Because in a very technical sense, while Christians have been the founders of America and have largely dominated American life, our secular government says that while we may be Christians and we may be the majority, right, everyone is treated the same, whether they are part of the majority or the minority. Because eventually, majorities can become minorities, and minorities can become majorities. And the human passion for vengeance, when you feel wronged, particularly when power now becomes available to you, is all too tempting. And all throughout history, we've seen what happens when we let minorities be unfairly prosecuted by majorities, or minorities unfairly hold sway over majorities. When we have a system where one group is attempting to go beyond not just being the majority, but dominating one person, or being a minority and unfairly dominating a majority of people without respecting the individual rights, these are all major sources of conflict. But our system doesn't put it in majority-minority sense. It puts it in the individual. You are part of this soup. You, just like me, are part of this American soup. We have our own unique flavor, but we are all subject to the same initial conditions. That if you are an American citizen, have certain unalienable rights that the government does not get to take away from you, without going through all of the procedures laid out to ensure that if they did it fairly, honestly, and without bias. It doesn't always play out that way, but that is the ideal that we have to constantly pursue. Even if you think it's not possible, that we must always be shooting for that, because we are all in this together. We are all unique, but we are all in this together. We all have our own flavors and we all may clash, but we are all in the same soup. And this soup is always evolving. It's always changing. Sometimes it's hotter. Sometimes it's colder. Sometimes it gets a lot of new ingredients. Sometimes it's the same ingredients. But it's always evolving. And soup has been around since almost the beginning of human history. And it has evolved with humans. And in my mind, as humans have tried to figure out how to create a society in a world filled with that's ultimately random chaos, that we have to agree on at least a few basic things for that to exist. And those few basic things are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are the bones that make up our society. And the stock? The stock is a system that allows these particular rights to exist, to be enforced, and to be the forefront of how we conduct ourselves in a civil society. And while the ingredients will change over time and in levels and in numbers, we are all still part of the same soup. Your ramen can be spicy, it can be mild, it can have chicken, it can have noodles. It couldn't even be ramen, it could be chicken noodle soup, it could be lobster bisque, it could be chili. But it's still a soup. It still has the same basic principles. And no matter what your race, creed, color, gender, or whatever else you identify yourself as, if you are an American, we are connected in a much larger way to our fellow citizens. Beyond time and distance, from state to state, from county to county, we are all part of something bigger. We are ourselves, and we are also part of something bigger. Before the motto of the United States was "In God We Trust," the official motto of the United States was "E pluribus unum," which in Latin means "out of many one." Now, you still see it all the time. It's on our money, it's on papers, it's in the Great Seal of the United States. The reason that it changed is to essentially disassociate us from the Soviet Union, which very much was aggressive in its atheist tendencies and saw religion as a threat. I am not a religious person. I guess you'd call me an atheist. I used to call myself a humanist, but humanism has taken a weird turn. I don't know if I identify with it anymore. If anything, I'm a believer in Americanism, whereas that I may not believe in an afterlife, but I believe in a world in which if you believe in an afterlife and that makes you happy and allows you to be free, then by God, live that way. As long as you don't get in my face and try to come after me for living alone. It's not as if I'm an individual who just wants to care about the rules. I'm a person who doesn't have a belief system, but knows the rules are important. It knows that those are in place and these principles are in place so that you and me can live our own lives. Whether it's in acceptance or tolerance or just not even knowing the other person is there, but we are allowed to live our lives individually. And even so, even if I've never met you before, if you're an American, you live the same inalienable rights existence that I do. Or at least you should. In my mind, if you want to make America great again, we need to make E pluribus unum a much bigger part of our lives than we have. You know, and in God we trust. I get it. It means that we all believe in a higher power in existence. And as a religious person, I'm not here to hate on it, but I get it. But for me, it just doesn't have the same appeal. And maybe the fact that E pluribus unum does kind of have that melting pot feel, and that maybe it just feels that out of many we are one means that we're not individuals with a common goal, that we are all people subject to one person's specific ideas and rule. I'll give you that. I still believe out of many ingredients we are one dish. Out of the many parts together we are one soup. But if you're looking for something different, right? Because E pluribus unum is Latin and you don't do that anymore, and in God we trust just doesn't feel right, or it feels like it's been abused or misused, or people say it all the time and they don't really mean it, then I've got news for you. Soup is not just a dish that I've spent an insane amount of time talking about and covering for this particular segment. I've also created an acronym for soup. And I'm spelling soup S-O-U-P. I don't think there's another way to spell it, but just in case anybody had any concerns. When I was thinking about what it should mean, have you ever tried to just take a word and make an acronym out of it? You realize that there's a lot of words and you try to figure out what flows best and what kind of comes together. When it comes to soup, again, while the debate was in the background and I was just trying to figure it out, it all just sort of came to me. Save our Union Posterity. S.O.U.P. We are engaged in the terms of humankind's existence in a world where ideas break down over time if people don't live up to them. That if we just give lip service to the ideas, then we don't actually care about them, and if we don't actually care about them, they can't possibly survive. Particularly when human psychology and human nature is very hard to overcome. Keep in mind, folks, while America has been around since 1776 and we've been trying to get this idea of we have inalienable rights, the tribal instinct that we have goes well beyond Homo sapiens. It goes into a form of nature that we are forever ingrained with, and that we must consciously try to remember does not control who we are. We have evolved. We have evolved a prefrontal cortex that allows you to make decisions. And while you still have emotions and you should accept those emotions, you should not let your emotions overcome your ability to think. It is a constant struggle to maintain and to be disciplined and to not get carried away in it, whether it's your passions for your people, for your religion, or for your sports team. Save our Union Posterity. And think about that word posterity. Think about what it means to have something that exists not only after you've died, but generations of your kin have gone. That thousands, if not millions of people have come and gone, but an idea or a statue or a place or something exists for posterity. For the world to see in the future that in a time when this idea may not have been popular, it was still right. And that it deserves to be right because when it shows its existence, the people take to it and it's good for everybody. Being alive is good for everybody. Being free is good for everybody. And being happy is good for everybody. And a system that allows us to live that way, that says that those things come before the state, that nature or your God or your nature's God gave to you before anybody else did. We built this. Think about this. Humanity just built this system into existence. And it has struggled to implement it in a way that is fair to everybody. And it has adapted, and it has changed, and it has grown. And the ideas that we may consider to be good may become bad. Bad may become good. And some may just be indifferent. But some are constant. And this system that we have that allows people to live the way it does is a constant that we should carry. It will adapt and change over time. And eventually, white people will no longer be the majority in this country. They may be a minority-majority country. There may be coalitions of racial and ethnic divisions. But that shouldn't matter because we'll still be Americans. Because we still live in a world where you as the individual have the right to live, to be free, and to be happy. That nobody, whether you're the minority or the majority, should be able to take that away from you. We're not just some pot where everything gets thrown into it and it all just sort of melts into a bland, generic version of what we are. We're too dynamic. But we're not a salad where all the ingredients are just thrown together but nothing really connects them besides a literal and metaphorical dressing. Right? If we live in that, then we're not really a meal. Then we're just some stuff thrown together to eat. But if we're soup, if we're something that has uniqueness to it, but also our uniqueness is part of a larger cause, and that larger cause then enhances our uniqueness, We have a feedback system in which I'm allowed to be free, and the system protects my right to be free, and by me being free, I'm allowed to help protect that system to allow other people to be free. For generations to come, we will see hundreds of years from now that people are still living under the same principles as was established by our Constitution, as seen in the Declaration of Independence. That the world will have said, move beyond monarchies, beyond dictatorships and fascism, in a world where people are protected, and that they acknowledge that no, the government doesn't let me be free or happy or live. I get that outside of them. That my God or nature or both made me who I am, and I exist outside of that sphere. If you're struggling to feel like we're united for any reason, if you're struggling to think that America can't just be one homogenous blob, but it also can't be a bunch of separate identities trying to work it out, then remember this idea. Save our Union posterity. Save our Union, one and inseparable for all time. One which exists outside of government for you to thrive, for you to be the best you can be, and for you to live your truth. You're not just some homogenous blob. You're not just some mixture of things that don't really have any definitive sense. You are you. But you're not just you. You're not alone in this country. You're not alone in terms of what rights you have. There are people who think differently than you, who live differently than you, but have the same rights and purpose and passion as you do. You are not a melted pot where everything is together and nothing, everything and nothing at the same time. And you are not a salad that is easily pulled apart and covered with only the faintest sense of togetherness. No, you are your own thing. And when you become an American, you become a part of a larger thing. And while you will affect that larger thing will also affect you. And in this world, we can be better than be divided. We can say that this person has a different religion, has a different lifestyle, has a different way of thinking than me, maybe even speaks a different language. And you may think that will cause a clash, right? But sometimes the conflict is good. Sometimes it allows us to know maybe they've got a point or maybe I've got a point. And because they realize that, maybe I'm a little bit more accepting of who they are and what they do. Maybe your soup is spicier than mine. Maybe my soup has more noodles. Maybe it's got more carrots. Maybe it's vegetarian. Maybe I didn't use stock at all. Maybe it was just water with other things boiled. But the fact that it's a soup and the fact that you can eat it and it provides nourishment and flavor, and the fact that its basic construct can be applied with different ingredients, of all different varieties, the fact that it can make old and new ingredients together, the fact that it can be something large and small, that it can be so very different and yet so very unique. That is what makes America so great. It's our ability to be individuals but also be one. Save our Union posterity. One of my favorite movies is the Academy Award-winning film Gladiator, starring Russell Crowe. It was the first DVD we ever got, and it's just a great film. And there's one particular line that I hear in this film, and it always gets to me. What we do in life echoes in eternity. And if you want it in Latin and want to hear a bad version of it, Quvat invita facimus in aeternum resonat. What we do in life echoes in eternity. The life that we have in the grand scheme of time is very short. And with that, people may feel that what are they doing that will really make an impact beyond my lifetime? Right? We all have heard planting seeds in a garden you never get to see, but how do we know there's going to be a garden there? How do I know all this work that I put into it will result in something much bigger and better and stronger down the road? And in some ways you can't know, because if you die before it happens, unless there is some form of afterlife to which you can observe it, or if there's a reincarnation in which you can see it, in my mind, you just go into the oblivion. And honestly, in an ironic way, you have to have faith that it will turn out in the future. What we can do in this time, as our ancestors have done before us, is figure out what works and what doesn't. What can we have for the future that will tell people long beyond us, long beyond our language and our customs, when our bones are all that is left? What will they know of us? You have to make something that will resonate years and decades and millennia beyond your existence. And mind you, in a world where we all make choices, some may feel small, but they may result in much larger effects down the road. Much like the aforementioned butterfly effect, a small decision today can affect something halfway around the world tomorrow. But in the larger, more grand sense of what makes us who we are, and I guess if you're not in America, I probably should have said this earlier, this is an American perspective. But I believe that the American way of life, that our declaration of our independence and our principles and our operating system to make those principles work, has been a net boon for humanity. Even in these COVID times, if you look at the numbers globally in terms of poverty and crime and war and disease, pandemic aside, right? There has never really been a better time to be a human being. And in my mind, you can't remove that from the presence of America on the world stage. And you can't remove American presence from the world stage without removing the things that makes America America. The bones and the stock that have created this massive, changing, fluid, dynamic dish that we call our country, that we call our nation. In my life, there are three things I am loyal to: me, my family, and my country. I live by the ideas that our country lives by. I want my family and my friends, by extension, to live that way. And my country encompasses my community, my state, my locality, people far beyond where I can see or where I can be and who I can meet. This is what it means to be an American. And this is what it means to live in this way of life. Is that hundreds of years from now, people who don't know you, who you may be related to in a strict genealogical way, right? If they still take your ideas seriously and live by them, right? If they figured out that there was a way to apply them to things that you did not know how to do, if it turned out that things that you thought were bad for the ideas not only were good, but were embraced by it, The idea that in the future you could see ethnic groups that were considered marginalized and not people, and not only become people, but become your fellow man and your fellow citizen. That religious ideas that could be considered unorthodox or heterodox can not only find a place to survive, but to thrive. And again, what may one day be a minority opinion may become a point of division and may become the vast majority of American opinion, and then one day may just become a given. And the system we have allows this to happen. The system we have is not perfect, but it can be more perfect. We the people didn't always mean we the people, but we the people made it we the people. And we didn't do it by dissolving everybody into a pot and making them all the same thing. And we're sure as hell not going to do it by making them all separate and just throwing them together and hoping it works out. We have to have a larger cause that respects us as individuals. And at least to me, it's not my religion, of which I don't really have one. It's not my ethnic group, of which I guess in my history I am of many. It's not my language, which I guess everybody in the world for the most part speaks, but I didn't really have a say in that. It is the ideas that I live by. And I live by the ideas of our founding. That people have a right to be alive and to be free and to be happy. And we must have a system that allows those things to happen, whether I like them or not. And frankly, the idea of what is American can change over time as well. To say something is un-American is to say that it violates these principles. But to be a Muslim isn't un-American. It's very American. To be a Christian isn't to be un-American, or to be Jewish is un-American. To be an American is to be an American if you're Jewish or Muslim or Christian or Black or Guatemalan or Portuguese. To be an American is to be part of something bigger than yourself. To be part of a union that is inseparable. To be something that will exist into posterity. That if I'm an American and I come here and raise a family, that generations from now, hopefully my lineage will still be in America and will be thriving. And when they look back on us, we can only hope that they see our flaws, that they see our triumphs, and they see who among us caved into pressure, who among us stood up for what is right, and who among us as human beings tried our best. We are not a homogeneous blob that is mindless, and we are not an unsecured, ungrouped bunch of people who are just trying to get together. We are a country and a nation that lives on the idea that you have a right to be alive, that you have a right to be free, and you have a right to be happy, that you get to have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that the very core structure, the bones that make this country, someone said no. They are we, and we are the people, and the people have certain unalienable rights. We are dynamic, and we are individualistic, and we are part of something larger than ourselves. We are S.O.U.P. Save our Union posterity. Be part of something bigger than yourself while being yourself, because in America, if the solution was between A and B, we usually just did both. Can't decide if we should have a House or a Senate? Do both. Can't decide if we should focus on ourselves or try to spread the message elsewhere? Do both. Can't decide if you want chicken or steak in your soup? Put both. But be yourself. And know that while your time is short, if you have the ability to make something of yourself, that you should. And you have the right to. And you are given that right, not from the government, but from nature and your God. What we do in life echoes in eternity. And if the internet tells us anything, eternity is a long time. And I can only hope that the words I speak today still resonate years from now, decades from now, millennia from now. I can only hope that in some way, shape, or form, the things I've said today, the coining of the phrase American S.O.U.P that I'm saying today, will be something that people down the road will be like, you know what? This guy had it. When no one else had it, this guy thought of something. This guy makes sense. This guy says that we are individuals, but we are also part of something bigger, and you can't be both, and they are not in conflict. In fact, they are together. In fact, together they create the positive feedback loop that is our society. That in a society where I am myself and I am part of something larger and you are part of something larger and you're also part of yourself, we can be separate and we can be together. We can be different and we can be the same. We can be many and we can be one. Let's get together and have some soup. Let's get together and save our Union posterity. Let us know that the way we live will be judged in time, hopefully favorably. In the same way we looked back at the past and laughed at the ridiculousness and cringed at the awfulness, people will do the same to us. And that is our birthright as humans. And I can only hope that long after I am gone and my kin carries on what legacy I have, that my country carries on in the ideas that I believed in, that will be there for posterity. That years from now, when all of my stuff is gone, when there's nothing left of me but my bones, that those bones that I have will not just be my physical bones, but the bones of my ideas, that the bones of the Declaration of Independence, that of life, liberty, and happiness, that goes beyond me. That as I go back into the earth will create something new, and it will still have the same inalienable rights that existed before me, and exist after me, and exist before the next generation, and exist after the next generation. And it's up to all of us to ensure that this is what happens, because you are not all the same. And you are not all untethered and indifferent. You are all individuals, and you are all also together. We are S.O.U.P. We are in this American S.O.U.P. We are Americans who save our Union posterity. Out of many, we are one and inseparable. And hopefully, if you agree with this, you can share it and you can add your own ingredient to the soup. This one meant a lot to me, guys. I'm really hoping to take this one farther than anything else. I just really think that this might be something that people can understand, because I think most people know what S.O.U.P is. The acronym makes sense. And in a larger sense, we are all part of this soup together. And frankly, the people who decide what ingredients get included in the soup and don't get included in the soup don't understand what the point of the soup is in the first place. It is these constant changes and evolutions on something that is also similarly the same. Is that what makes America unique? It's what makes our exceptionalism so exceptional. And I am an American exceptionalist. And I do believe that our ideas have made the world a better place. And if we forget those ideas, then what is the rest of the world going to look to when they don't know what to do? And you know what? E pluribus unum got us pretty far. In God we trust, those things be going pretty strong. The melting pot may have been our original idea, and we may have moved to the salad to try to accommodate different things. But in this ebb and flow back and forth, the soup is a good middle ground. The soup allows us to be who we are and part of something bigger at the same time. The soup allows the old to become new, for the different to become together, and for those unique differences to blend into something that's just a little bit different than what it was before. That it is itself and that it is something new and something bigger at the same time. Big thanks to myself for writing all this out, for trying to come up with the acronym, and for learning a lot about S.O.U.P in the process. Be yourselves and be part of something bigger. And don't forget to have some S.O.U.P.